Welcome to the Bible Breakdown. It's a black man and woman in America who no longer identify as believers. This show contains adult languages, themes, and isn't meant for children. As black people, we respect the history of the black church in America, but its current state is massively abusive, and we think the Bible might be part of the problem. Listen and let us know what you think. Peace. Welcome back to the Bible Breakdown. I'm your host, Kat.
And I'm your host, TK.
Hi, TK.
Hello.
It's good to see you.
You as well. As I told you before, you look nice this morning.
Thank you. See, listeners, that means on the other mornings I didn't look quite as nice. I made an effort today. No, I have to go be an adult today. So last time on the Bible Breakdown, we did a lot of complicated name listing. It was basically just kind of like a list of all the stuff that Solomon had and everybody he had working for him. People will be happy to know that he had someone in charge of the forced labor. He didn't have to do that himself, so good for him. Another good word for that would be overseer. That would be more of a parallel to American slavery. But of course, this would have been Middle Eastern slavery, which was also bad. There's no good version of slavery. And then he builds the temple because God made a universe, but he needs you to build him a house. And that's pretty much what I remember.
Yeah, I think that covered it.
Thank you.
I think it's actually on me for starters.
Mm-hmm.
1Kings 7. Well, yeah, 1Kings 7.
New Revised
Solomon,
Standard Version.
The New Revised Standard Version is what we are reading. Oh man, this is long. All right, let's just get started. Solomon's palace and other buildings. Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished his entire house. He built the house of the forest of the Lebanon, 100 cubits long, 50 cubits long, and 30 cubits high, built on 4 rows of cedar pillars with cedar beams on the pillars. It was roofed with cedar on the 45 rafters, 15 in each row, which were on the pillars. There were window frames in the 3 rows, facing each other in the 3 rows. All the doorways and doorposts had 4-sided frames opposite facing each other in the 3 rows. He made half of pillars 50 cubits long and 30 cubits wide. There was a porch in front with pillars and a canopy in front of them. He made the hall of the throne where he was to pronounce judgment, the hall of justice, covered with cedar from floor to floor. His own house where he would reside in the other court back of the hall was of the same construction. Solomon also made a house like this hall for Pharaoh's daughter, whom he had taken in marriage. All these were made of costly stones, cut according to measure, sawed with saws back and front, from the foundation to the coping, and from outside to the great court. The foundation was of costly stones, huge stones of 8 and 10 cubits. They were costly stones above, cut to measure, and cedar wood. The great court had 3 courses of dressed stone to 1 layer of cedar beams all around, so had the inner court of the house of the Lord and the vestibule of the house. Product of Hiram. Do we say this person's name was different before? I'm just going to stay with Hiram. Products of Hiram.
That was Hiram.
Hiram. That's what it was. Okay, see, I remember from a couple episodes ago. Products of Hiram, the bronze worker. New King Solomon invited and received Hiram from Tyre. He was the son of a widow of the tribe of Naphtali, whose father, a man of Tyre, had been an artisan in bronze. He was full of skill, intelligence, and knowledge in working bronze. He came to King Solomon and did all his work. He was cast 2 pillars of bronze. 18 cubits was the height of the one, and a cord of 12 cubits would encircle it. The second pillar was the same. He also made 2 capitals of molten bronze to set on the tops of the pillars. The height of the one capital was given cubits, and the height of the other capital was 5 cubits. There were nets of checker work with reefs of chain work for the capitals on the tops of the pillars, 7 for the one capital and 7 for the other capital. He made the columns with 2 rows around each lattice work to cover the capitals that were above the pomegranates. He did the same with the other capital. Now the capitals that were on the tops of the pillars and the vestibule were of lily work 4 cubits high. The capitals were on the 2 pillars and also above the rounded projection that was beside the lattice work. There were 200 pomegranates in rows all around, and so with the other capital he set up the pillars at the vestibule of the temple. He set up the pillar on the south and called it Jachin, and he set up the pillar on the north and called it Boaz. On the top of the pillars was lily work, thus the work of the pillars was finished. Then he made the molten sea. It was round 10 cubits from brim to brim and 5 cubits high. A line of 30 cubits would encircle it completely. Under its brim were panels all around, each of 10 cubits surrounding the sea. There were 2 rows of panels cast when it was cast. It stood on 12 oxen, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The sea was set on them. The hindquarters of each were toward the inside. Its thickness was a handbreadth. Its brim was made like the brim of a cup, like the flower of a lily. It held 2,000 baths. He also made the 10 stands of bronze. Each stand was 4 cubits long, 4 cubits wide, and 3 cubits high. This was the construction of the stands. They had borders. The borders were within the frames. On the borders that were set in the frames were lions and oxen and cherubim. On the frames, both above and below the lions and oxen, there were reefs of beveled work. Each stand had 4 bronze wheels and axles of bronze. At the 4 corners were supports for a basin. The supports were cast with reefs at the side of each. Its opening was within the crown, whose height was 1 cubit. Its opening was round as a pedestal is made. It was 1.5 cubits wide. At its opening, there were carvings. Its carvings were 4-sided, not round. The 4 wheels were underneath the borders. The axles of the wheels were in the stands, and the height of a wheel was 1.5 cubits. The wheels were made like a chariot wheel. Their axles, their rims, their spokes, and their hubs were all cast. There were 4 supports at the 4 corners of each stand. The supports were of one piece with the stands. On the top of the stand, there was a round band 1/2 cubit high, and on the top of the stand, its stays and its borders were of just one piece with it. On the surfaces of its stays and on its borders, he carved cherubim, lions, and palm trees. There were where each had space with reefs all around. In this way, he had the 10 standards. All of them were cast alike with the same price in the same form. He made 10 basins of bronze. Each basin held 40 baths. Each basin measured 4 cubits. There was a basin for each of the 10 stands. He set 5 of the stands on the south side of the house and 5 on the north side of the house. He set the sea on the southeast corner of the house. Hiram also made the plots, the shovels, and the basins. So Hiram finished all the work that he did for King Solomon on the house of the Lord. The 2 pillars, the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the tops of the pillars, the 2 lattice works to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the tops of the pillars, the 400 pomegranates for the 2 lattice works, 2 rows of pomegranates for each lattice work, to cover the 2 bowls of the capitals that were on the pillars, the 10 stands, the 10 basins on the stands, the 1 sea, and the 12 oxen underneath the sea. The pots, the shovels, and the basins, all these vessels that Hiram made for King Solomon for the house of the Lord were of burnished bronze. In the plain of the Jordan, the king cast them in the clay ground between Succoth and Zarethan. Solomon left all the vessels unweighed because there were so many of them. The weight of the bronze was not determined. So Solomon made all the vessels that were in the house of the Lord, the golden altar, the golden table for the bread of the presence, the lampstands of pure gold, 5 on the south side and 5 on the north. In front of the inner sanctuary, the flowers, the lamps, and the tongs of gold, the cups, snuffers, basins, dishes for incense, and fire pans of pure gold, the sockets for the doors of the innermost part of the house, the most holy place, and for the doors of the nave of the temple of gold. Thus all the work that King Solomon did on the house of the Lord was finished. Solomon brought in the things that his father David had dedicated, the silver, the gold, and the vessels, and stored them in the treasuries of the house of the Lord. Whew.
Thanks be to our decorating Lord.
You know, you know what? You can go ahead.
Okay. No, that was not interesting. But, well, I'll take that back. It did make me think about, okay, this is definitely the design inspiration for the kind of European Catholic Church. Like a lot of their sort of old cathedrals, like when they talk about the altar and all this, gold, it's very ornate. But, yeah, I don't feel particularly inspired by this. Like, this isn't a place where I feel like I like temples that are kind of like maybe minimal. Like, I do like the candlelight, maybe some flowers, just something so like a space where you can feel at peace. But this sort of ornate, sort of Versace thing isn't my bag.
I just feel like none of this is talked about in the church, and for a book that,
well, they're doing show not tell, because it looks like this.
Then I don't know, I guess the Bible could have been structured differently. Like, this is unnecessary. For if I'm just a lowly worshiper, I don't necessarily need this. I'm not designing this for my house, so like I just need.
Well, it's not your house. It's the Lord's house that Hiram built.
I don't need to know how the Lord's house is.
Well, this is the thing.
Built.
It's to set this sense of grandeur. It's like, oh my goodness, the time of Solomon was so amazing. Actually, while you were reading, I was kind of, drifting out a little bit. So
this feels like fluff.
It is filler
like
for
fluff.
Sure. It's but I went online to see if like maybe there were some images of what they thought this would all look like or whatever. And yeah, and the fact that it was probably built by the forced labor. Another word for that would be slaves. So it is, to me, maybe a reason why our world looks the way it is, where, we can look around, even in our own state at buildings that are pretty grand. They have pillars, and they were probably built by enslaved people. Like the White House.
Did they have? Oh, well, you meant, okay. Well, you said our own state. I was like,
well, no, like, even though, like, you wouldn't necessarily be able to, like, buy or sell slaves here, like, there was, like, slavery. Like, people would have to, like, you could conscript, because that was a big part of slavery, is where you would lend out your labor force. So, like, even though, like, states like free states wouldn't necessarily let you buy or sell slaves there, or like recapture your slaves, like you could definitely send them there. That was the thing too, because they'd have laws where as soon as you step into a non-slave state, you're a free person. And so, but that was the whole point of keeping us from learning how to read, because you wouldn't want your slaves to know that. So yeah, it was a whole mind effort. But to me, the fact that the people who enslaved us used this document as sort of a outline as to how they set up their society, I think this does give me some insight into why even the architecture looks the way it does.
Yeah, I feel like this was a waste of my time reading that. And it does not need to be included in, or even if it's included, they could have structured the Bible where you get the stories that we're supposed to follow and stuff like that, and then these are the stories for the people who need to be concentrated on.
Yeah, for the expanded universe.
Yeah.
The biblical expanded universe. Yeah, this wasn't necessarily very helpful, but we're coming into the sort of season. It's going to be graduations, and I'm just thinking about like, oh man, there's just going to be so many prayers of thanksgiving as to how the Lord got us through this. And it's kind of like, I don't know, like, to me, when I see any kind of good in my life, it's because people have been working really hard. So just my observation. But I'm gonna go ahead and get started on 1 Kings 8 because these are such long chapters.
Yep.
Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Okay, powering through. Then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes, the leaders of the ancestral houses of the Israelites before King Solomon in Jerusalem, to bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of the city of David, which is Zion. All the people of Israel assembled to King Solomon at the festival in the month of Ethanim, which is the 7th month. And all the elders of Israel came, and the priests carried the ark. So they brought up the ark of the Lord, the tent of meeting, and all the holy vessels that were in the tent. The priests and the Levites brought them up. King Solomon and all the congregation of Israel who had assembled before him were with him before the ark, sacrificing so many sheep and the oxen that they could not be counted or numbered. Then the priests brought the ark of the covenant of the Lord to its place in the inner sanctuary of the house, in the most holy place, underneath the wings of the cherubim, for the cherubim spread out their wings over the place of the ark, so that the cherubim made a covering above the ark and its poles. The poles were so long that the ends of the poles were seen from the holy place in front of the inner sanctuary, but they could not be seen from the outside. They are there to this day. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets of stone that Moses had placed there at Horeb, where the Lord made a covenant with the Israelites when they came out of the land of Egypt. And when the priest came out of the holy place, the cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priest could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. Then Solomon said, "The Lord has said that he would dwell in the thick darkness. I have built you an exalted house, a place for you to dwell in forever." Solomon's speech. Then the king turned around and blessed all the assembly of Israel while the assembly of Israel stood. He said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who with his hands has fulfilled what he promised with his mouth to my father David, saying, since the day that I brought my people Israel out of Egypt, I have not chosen a city from any of the tribes of Israel in which to build a house, that my name might be there. But I choose David to be over my people Israel. My brother David had it in mind to build a house for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. But the Lord said to my father David, you did well to consider building a house for my name. Nevertheless, you shall not build the house, but your son, who shall be born to you, shall build the house for my name. Now the Lord has upheld the promise that he made, for I have risen in the place of my father David. I sit on the throne of Israel as the Lord promised, and I have built the house of the name of the Lord God of Israel. Therefore, there I have provided a place for the ark, in which the covenant of the Lord that he made with our ancestors when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. Solomon's prayer of dedication. Then Solomon stood before the altar of the Lord in the presence of the assembly of Israel and spread out his hands to heaven. He said, O Lord, God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth beneath, keeping covenant and steadfast love for your servants who walk before you with all of their heart. The covenant that you kept for your servant, my father David, as you declared to him, you promised with your mouth, and have this day fulfilled with your hand. Therefore, O Lord God of Israel, keep for your servant my father David that which you promised him, saying, there shall never fail you a successor before me to sit on the throne of Israel, if only your children look to their way, to walk before me as you have walked before me. Therefore, O God of Israel, let your word be confirmed, which you promised to your servant my father David. But will God indeed dwell on this earth? Even heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you, much less this house that I have built. Regard your servant's prayer with this plea. O Lord my God, heed the cry and the prayer that your servant prays to you today, that your eyes may be open night and day toward this house, the place which you said, my name shall be there, that you may heed the prayer that your servant prays towards this place. Hear the plea of your servant and your people when they pray toward the place. Oh, hear the heaven, you dwelling place. Heed and forgive. If someone sins against a neighbor and is given an oath to swear and comes and swears before your altar in this house, then hear in heaven and act and judge your servants, condemning the guilty by bringing their conduct on their own head and vindicating the righteous by rewarding them according to their righteousness. When your people Israel have sinned against you, are defeated before an enemy but turn against you, confess your name, pray and plead with this house. Then hear in heaven, forgive the sin of your people Israel, and bring them again to the land that you have given their ancestors. When heaven is shut up and there is no rain because they have sinned against you, and then they pray towards this place, confess your name, and turn from their sin because you punish them, then hear in heaven and forgive the sin of your servants, your people Israel, when you teach them the good way in which you should walk, and grant rain on their land which you have given to your people as an inheritance. If there is a famine in the land, if there's plague, blight, mildew, locust, or caterpillar, if the enemy besieges them in any of their cities, whatever plague or whatever sickness there is, whatever prayer, whatever plea, there is an individual from all your people Israel knowing the afflictions of their own hearts, so that they stretch out their hands towards this house. Then hear in heaven, your dwelling place, forgive, act, and render to all those whose heart you know, according to all their ways, for only you know what is in every human heart, so that they may fear you all the days that they live in the land that you gave our ancestors. Likewise, when a foreigner who is not of the people of Israel comes from a distant land because of your name, for they shall hear of your great name, your mighty hand, and your outstretched arm, when a foreigner comes and prays towards this land, then hear in heaven, your dwelling place, and do according to all that the foreigner calls you, so that all the peoples of the earth may know your name and fear you, as do your people Israel, so that they may know that your name has been invoked in this house that I have built. If your people go out to battle against their enemy by whatever way you shall send them, and they pray to the Lord toward the city that you have chosen and the house that I have built for your name, then hear in heaven their prayer and their plea, and maintain their cause. If they sin against you, for there is no one who does not sin, and you are very angry, and you are angry with them, and give them to an enemy, so that they are carried away and captive to a land of the enemy, far off and near. Yet if they come to their senses in the land which they have been taken captive, and repent and plead with you in the land of their capture, saying, we have sinned, we have done wrong, we have acted wickedly. If they repent with all their heart and soul in the land of their enemies who took them captive, and pray to you toward their land, which you gave their ancestors, the city you have chosen, and the house that you have built for your name, then hear in heaven, your dwelling place, their prayer and their plea, maintain their cause, and forgive your people who have sinned against you, and all their transgressions that have been committed against you, and grant them compassion in the sight of their captors, so that they may have compassion on them, for they are your people and heritage, which you have brought out of Egypt from the midst of the iron smelter. Let your eyes be open to the plea of your servant, and to the plea of your people Israel, listening to them whenever they call you, for you have separated them among all the peoples of earth to be your heritage, just as you promised Moses, your servant, when you brought out our ancestors out of Egypt. O Lord God. Solomon blesses the assembly. Now, when Solomon finished offering this prayer and plea to the Lord, he arose from facing the altar of the Lord, where he had knelt with his hands outstretched towards heaven. He stood and blessed all the assembly of Israel with a loud voice. Blessed be the Lord, who has given rest to his people Israel according to all he promised, not one who has failed all of his good promise, which he spoke through his servant Moses. The Lord our God will be with us, as he was with our ancestors. May he not leave us or abandon us, but incline our hearts to him, to walk in all his ways, and to keep his commandments, his statutes, and his ordinances, which he commanded our ancestors. Let these words of mine, with which I pleaded before the Lord, be near to the Lord our God day and night. May he maintain the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel, as each day requires, so that all the people of the earth may know the Lord is God. There is no other. Therefore, devote yourselves completely to the Lord our God, walking in his statutes and keeping his commandments, as at this day. Solomon offered sacrifices. Then the king and all of Israel with him offered sacrifices before the Lord. Solomon offered as sacrifices of well-being to the Lord 22,000 oxen, 120,000 sheep. So the king and all the people of Israel dedicated the house of the Lord. The same day the king consecrated the middle of the court that was in front of the house of the Lord, for he offered the burnt offerings and the grain offerings and the fat pieces of the sacrifices of well-being, because the bronze altar that was before the Lord was too small to receive the burnt offerings and the grain offerings and the fat pieces of the sacrifices of well-being. So Solomon held the festival at that time, and all of Israel with him, a great assembly, people of Leb, Hamath, to the Wadi of Egypt before the Lord our God 7 days. On the 8th day he sent people away, and they blessed the king and went to their tents joyful and in good spirits because of all the goodness that the Lord has shown his servant David and to his people Israel.
Okay, that was such a lot. So if I gathered this correctly, Solomon basically led or gathers the leaders of Israel to Jerusalem for, I guess, the dedication of his newly built temple. He then has to deliver a prayer to God, asking for God to, or acknowledging God's been faithful and pleading that God continued to presence in their temple. I don't know. And then he asks God to hear the prayers of the Israelites when they pray at the temple and forgive their sins and grant them rain and other blessings.
Sure.
That's what I got. Okay.
What I got from this is why church was the way it was when I was growing up. Because you have to sit through a long, boring speech and prayers, and then at the end you get to eat. Because I mean that's pretty much what just happened here. There was a lot of blah 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 blah. It was important though, because like I said, this explains a lot of why our world looks the way it does right now and why people are killing themselves over the Middle East, because they're like, well, whoever's in charge of Israel is in charge of the church, basically. That's where, also can't say this enough, this idea of we need to worship the Lord because he brought us out of Egypt. Like, that story, for one, is very likely a myth. Like, even Moses is probably not a real person. So, and keep in mind, all these statutes and ordinances that we have to maintain involve a lot of slavery. And it even has it worked in here. It's like, hey, if you ever get carried off into a foreign land, if you just turn to us and pray. Once again, I think this is probably something that was heavily propagated towards the enslaved black people in America, because we were carried off to a foreign land, and if we just look and pray to Jesus, then we'll be delivered. And that's actually not what happens. You have to fight your oppressors every step of the way. Like, that's how you, like, it's not because it's like, oh, you were good enough, you prayed enough, and now you're free. It's like, and that also suggests that at a certain point you were bad enough that you deserved what that, being enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't really have much to go with that. This is just another example of why we should update our standard of how we deal with each other.
Yes, because it wasn't. But for now, he's got a fancy place for the priest. Like, I think he is very much saying, like, I am in league with the priest class, but I'm also in charge of it.
Seems like a conflict of interest.
It's not. Like, I think in this day and age, you would need to have some sort of alliance with the spiritual leaders of a society, because you don't have, like, good answers for questions yet. You know what I mean? Like, to maintain order, people do kind of need to be reined in. So, but like I said, I feel like you could still do it without slavery.
Yeah, less slavery.
Yeah, less slavery, people. I mean, I'm not even saying zero slavery. Like, just less.
Just less.
No, I would like a zero amount.
That would be great. Also, don't sex traffic people, like allegedly.
I mean, I feel like that's what always happens when there's slavery. There's no way to avoid it.
Yeah. I mean, just don't do that.
Yeah, we shouldn't do that. Everybody. I mean, but that's not in the Bible, where we should treat people with the bodily autonomy that we wish for ourselves.
Do you think that a lot of this just happens because people are in situations where they have lack of resources?
Yes, that's why I think it's a big push to not propagate things like UBI, like universal basic income, because and you can see the data, like in most places in the world that are like peaceful and people have like reasonable access to resources, they're not as religious. But in places where there's like abject poverty and stuff like that, those places tend to be very, very religious. So I think there is sort of this sinister motivation for a lot of religious people, because I think instinctually they kind of know, even pushing back against education, like they don't really want people to have access to, certain books and, certain ideas. So yeah, they actually, so you end up with people who are very intellectually stunted because they want to stay in this place of sort of perpetual childhood where you get to believe in Santa Claus.
It's okay. We can grow up.
Yeah, it's time. Like I said, I was like embracing being an adult. Like it is, the idea of being like having a big, strong daddy who's going to take care of everything. Like there's appeal there, but ultimately, that's a fantasy. So it's just better if we get real.
Yeah. All right. 1 Kings 9. God appears to Solomon. When Solomon had finished building the house of... Again.
He appears again to Solomon.
Yes. When Solomon had finished building the house of the Lord in the king's house and all that Solomon desired to build, the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time, and he appeared to him at Gibeon. The Lord had said to him, I have heard your prayer and your plea, which you made before me. I have consecrated this house that you have built and put my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will be there for all time. As for you, if you walk before me as David your father walked, with integrity of heart and uprightness, doing according to all that I have commanded you, in keeping my statutes and my ordinances, then I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever. As I promised your father David, saying, there shall not fail you a successor on the throne of Israel. If you turn aside from following me, you or your children, and do not keep my commandments and my statutes that I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut Israel off from the land that I have given them, and the house that I have consecrated for my name. I will cast out of my sight. Israel will become a proverb and a taunt among all peoples. This house will become a heap of ruins. Everyone passing by it will be astonished and will hiss, and they will say, why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and to this house? They will say, because they have forsaken the Lord their God, who brought their ancestors out of the land of Egypt, and embraced other gods, worshiping them, serving them. Therefore the Lord has brought this disaster upon them. At the end of 20 years in which Solomon had built the two houses, built the two houses, the house of the Lord and the king's house, King Hiram of... Are we saying Tyre or Tyre?
I think it's Tyre.
Okay, King Hiram of Tyre, having supplied Solomon with cedar and cypress timber and gold, as much as he desired, King Solomon gave to Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. But when Hiram came from Tyre to see the cities that Solomon had given him, they did not please him. Therefore he said, what kind of cities are these that you have given me, my brother? So they are called the land of Kabul to this day. Kabul to this day. But Hiram has said...
Kabul, is that the same one in Afghanistan?
I don't know.
Okay.
Is it? We'll find out in a second.
All right.
But Hiram had sent to the king 120 talents of gold. Other acts of Solomon. This is the account of the forced labor that King Solomon conscripted to build the house of the Lord and his own house, the Milo and the wall of Jerusalem, Hazor, Megiddo, Gezer. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up and captured Gezer and burned it down, had killed the Canaanites who lived in the city, and had given it as dowry to his daughter, Solomon's wife. So Solomon rebuilt Gezer, Lower Beth Horon, Baalath, Tamar in the wilderness within the land, as well as all of Solomon's storage cities, the cities of his chariots, the cities for his cavalry, and whatever Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and in the land of his dominion. All the people who were there are all the people who were left of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, were not all of the people of Israel. Their descendants who were still left in the land, whom the Israelites were unable to destroy completely. These Solomon conscripted for slave labor, and so they are to this day. But of the Israelites, Solomon made no slaves. They were the soldiers. They were his officials, his commanders, his captains, and the commanders of his chariotry and cavalry. They were the chief officers who were over Solomon's work, 550 who had charge of these people who carried on the work. But Pharaoh's daughter went up from the city of David to her own house that Solomon had built for her. Then he built the Millo. Three times a year, Solomon used to offer up burnt offerings and sacrifices of well-being on the altar that he built for the Lord, offering incense before the Lord. So he completed the house. Solomon's commercial activity. King Solomon built a fleet of ships at Ezion Geber, which is near Eloth, on the shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom. Hiram sent his servants with the fleet sailors who were familiar with the sea, together with the servants of Solomon. They went to Ophir and imported from there 420 talents of gold, which they delivered to King Solomon.
Yeah, 420. So, okay. Thanks we got. I can't help but notice again the use of slave labor. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, it was there.
It was so there. In fact, they just wanted to make sure it's like, but he didn't enslave the Israelites, though. Just them other people, because fuck them. Also, I was kind of struck with the way they described when the Lord is talking to Solomon again and saying, as for you, if you walk before me as David your father walked, with integrity of heart, uprightness, doing according to all that I've commanded you. It's like, okay, what did we keep saying about David the whole time we were reading about him?
That he was a fucker.
That he what?
He was a fucker. He was a bad person.
He was not a good person. I would not use the word integrity.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Integrity. That just makes me think of South Park, too. When Stan's dad Randy started selling weed, and he called it Tegrity. For integrity. Integrity Farms. Integrity Farms. Okay, sorry. I guess I'm watching more South Park than TK. But, yeah, it was like a whole thing. But, for listeners who maybe, if this is your first episode, if you go back and read the story of David, the word integrity is not going to be what pops into mind. Genocidal adulterer would be a good descriptor. Murderous. I mean, to me, I feel like the whole reason Solomon exists in this world is because David killed Bathsheba's husband. Well, first he impregnated her, killed her husband, and then married her. But everything was cool because Samuel was like, okay, God's going to kill that baby, but then you'll have another one and that one will be cool. And then God will be all right with you.
Yeah, seems like a very weird, I don't know, a weird way of doing things.
Yeah, and they also mentioned that he got a dowry from the Pharaoh's daughter. She came with some land. So that makes me think she probably wasn't like, this was like back in the day where, not even back in the day. This still happens all over the world all the time, where men just have control of young girls and use them as political pawns. So, So like a lot of times, I'm sure the Pharaoh's daughter was very beautiful and all, but I'm pretty sure he married her just to create a political alliance.
Yeah, like the movie Dune.
Yes, very much like Dune, or pretty much every, royal whatever in history. Like, this is why, there were so many revolts to overthrow monarchies, because these systems are bad.
I don't like monarchies. They're really, really silly to me, and I never understood the obsession with the fucking England and
The
the
royal
Queen and
family. Yeah,
like,
once again, I think it's
like
this.
why are we still giving these people anything?
I think it's this idea of people do like the idea that there's this divine order where the God of the universe has selected leaders for us and that this line is the line that's supposed to lead us. But I think history's shown us that that's not necessarily how we get the best leaders. Like, we need to really learn about picking better leaders because we do need leadership when we're living in large societies, even small societies, like even in a like family, there has to be some leadership. So i think I think schools should have more leadership courses.
Agreed.
Thank you.
One thing I also found crazy in here was I don't know. I guess I more so found this funny when he said when Solomon showed up to Tyre and then to see the other cities that Hiram gave him, he was just like, "What kind of cities are these?"
Yeah, it was like the fuck. That was like, wow, okay. And then because then they were like, that's why it's called Kabul to this day. So I'm like,
Oh
is
yeah.
that like the Kabul? Like, we spell it with a K here in the West, but like, is that the same one from Afghanistan? Because that would make sense because it is like a really hard place to live in like the Swath Valley and all that stuff. Or no, I'm thinking of
Um,
the Swath Valley. Maybe Kabul is Kabul the capital. Maybe that is like an easier place to live.
I don't think it's the same Kabul.
Okay, but it's just interesting. We got a lot of. It's just interesting to remember that all of this is
Oh
taking.
wait, no, there's a contradiction because another thing says Kabul with the K is probably the biblical Kabul with a C, mentioned in the
Yeah,
book of Joshua,
this is a fun time
which
to
we're not
remind
in.
people that all of these people we're talking about would have been very, very dark people in the Middle East and Africa and like maybe Asia. Like, all of this going on, like, even though every time we've seen depictions of this growing up, it was like white people. That's what we see in the paintings. That's what we see in the movies. That's only because white people made that stuff. In real life, like, even now, these are darker people. Back then, they would have probably been even darker because, like, the idea of white supremacy didn't have traction back then, but it does now. So, like, in a lot of these places, people are trying to, like, lighten up and kind of do the eugenics thing. So, and there's a lot of skin bleaching over there too, which is really sad. But next time on Bible Breakdown, I'm actually super excited. Not ironically, I love this story, like the Queen of Sheba, like, because it's one
Hmm.
of the only places in the Bible where you know for sure there's a black lady. But even then, they like there's a lot of like depictions of the Queen of Sheba as like a very pale woman. She would have been black, even like shorthand in these areas of like the world, like in the Middle East and Africa. If you say Sheba, you're talking about a black woman. It's even used as a pejorative. So yeah. So, and then apparently Solomon messes up. Already.
Yep.
And then Nordham, there's then the immediate succession. So yeah, it doesn't sound like he had a very success. I mean, if you're immediately put in charge of an organization and it immediately like there's a huge fracture, there, yeah, he probably needed some leadership courses.
He could have benefited from those. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't feel like a lot happened other than some real estate deals today.
And
But,
some HGTV stuff and a barbecue.
yeah, not even a good one.
No, but a big one.
I mean, it was long for sure.
Well, no, they said there was like so much cattle, like you couldn't even count it.
This seems excessive.
And they were probably exaggerating a little bit. They took a little time. They could have counted it for sure. But
The
yeah,
Bible exaggerate? Oh my God! Who
I
would have
know,
ever
I
thought?
know. But I'm learning. I actually am. I do feel like I'm learning quite a bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm learning something. I don't know.
But it's
how
just
I'll
making me more like ick. This is worse than I thought. So much slavery, guys.
And yet people still don't read this. I just don't. Now that I'm older, I just don't get the natural curiosity to like, oh, if I'm involved in this thing, I should probably
what it
learn
is.
more about it.
You should. But until then, please join us next time, and your body belongs to you.
Be curious, not judgmental. BibleBreakdownPodcast@gmail.com.